welcome from all of us at Savills to you out there across the whole of the UK to this day at the Royal Highland Show. Sadly, not in person, but here we are to offer up where we see things at the moment and where they might go. And I'm joined today by Hugo Struthers, who looks after the Savills Rural Division in Scotland, Andrew MacDonald, who looks after the food and farming discipline in Scotland, and my colleague Evelyn Channing, long-standing agent in the rural world. So these are the four that you're going to see for the rest of this program, which will run for 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll just kick off straight away with what's going on. And there's a huge amount of change going on, and we all know a lot about the changes that are coming. Many of us, and us included, don't know the answers yet, but we'll give you our opinions. And there are probably two main factors running through the rural industry just now across the whole of the UK and Scotland: the drive to net zero and the exit from the EU. And what does that mean for farming support, subsidies and changes going forward? So looking at that, first of all, let's start with Hugo. What are you hearing on the ground from your clients and contacts about these two changes?
Thanks, Charlie. Well, maybe let Andrew talk a little bit more, about the real operational farmer. But I think from sort of the wider businesses and communities that I speak to, I see some real polarized views, particularly the sort of forestry versus farming sometimes can come out, or conservation versus sort of country sports, and some of those issues do bubble up. But I suppose in reality, the opportunity there is one of a question of balance, and to take a holistic view over the management of the land, both socio-economic, environmental benefits. And I think many of our clients and people we interact with definitely want to do the right thing, and they effectively want to manage good, well-rounded businesses that do offer that sort of return to the local economy. And
you probably think there's room for both, isn't there? There's room for all sorts. And going forward, we're probably going to lack a structure that we've had for the last 50 years. And people need to decide out there what is the objective of occupying the ground that they're owning or farming just now. And Andrew, just following on from that, to try and give it some substance in terms of support to farming, are we in Scotland going to be following what's happening in England, which is causing some consternation in terms of support?
Yes, indeed. And I think that's one of the big questions that's on many farmers' minds looking forward, is what happens next. And we have significantly less detail about what's happening in Scotland than what's happening in England. In common with previous reviews of agricultural support, DEFRA have chosen to take a more aggressive approach to changes in agricultural policy, and are already in the process of changing their support mechanisms, where in Scotland we know that things are going to be largely unchanged up to and including 2024, after which, as a general theme, I would expect similar themes emerging, which is that of public money for public goods, and support targeted at things like climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and the wider environmental benefits of land management. But as Hugo mentioned earlier, I think it's really important to take a holistic view. This polarization of farming versus forestry is potentially damaging for both. And it's one of the things I really appreciated when speaking to some of our forestry colleagues in Savills, is that it's not just plant trees on everything, because we also have to eat. And Sitka spruce doesn't make that good eating.
It's a very good point, that, Andrew, because the Scottish government has said that it wishes to support commercial farming. Certainly in words it said that, perhaps more than England has. And is that going to change, Evelyn? Do you think the interest from English farmers looking to come to a more friendly commercial farming environment in Scotland?
You're a very brave man to say that. Actually, I wrote that recently in an update on the market. I noticed it's been deleted. But what we do see English farmers looking over the border, because I think we do still operate in a more rural environment. And it may well sway people who are committed to producing food.
And taking Andrew's point about there's room, we don't want to go down the total forestry or total farming or total environment route. Is there room on our farms up here for a blend of all these facets?
Yeah, I think so. It's very notable that not that long ago, any discussions with farmers about trees was a no-go area. And actually now, I think everybody is taking stock, as you're saying, reviewing. I don't suppose I've seen a line in the sand as obvious as there is now for people just to try to understand what the future does hold and what the options are. And I do see people sitting back and looking, where are we going? What do we want to do as a family and plan? And yep, trees is definitely in there.
I think, sorry, if I could just jump in there, Ev, I think that's a really good point. And the more that we see, I think it's more about land management than it is about farming or forestry or carbon. It's an integrated part of a whole, and whether you're a landlord or a farmer or a tenant, it applies equally. And it's about future land use options, which makes it challenging, but also makes it really exciting. And I think there will be a lot more opportunities arising, particularly if we take that view that it is about land management more than just one specific element of it.
It's probably a much more acceptable way of achieving what the government has set out to achieve, our planting targets, etc., etc. I mean, I already can sense a reaction from some landowners about the change to the landscape, the immediate landscape, and actually to some people it's not acceptable to think that lots of the uplands are going to be planted in trees. But if it's broken down into more smaller defined areas across the lowlands and the gap between the uplands and the low grounds, maybe that's the landscape that will come forward, and it will be acceptable to everybody.
Which is, we're not getting guidance yet anyway from the Scottish Government as to there are going to be areas in Scotland that will be turned over to trees and others will remain as they are. So actually, it makes a lot of sense for individual farms. The average size of farm in Scotland is much larger than England, to let individual farmers choose. And there's no doubt some have decided to capitalize on the high prices for planting land and sell off parts of the farm. Others, and I hope the majority, are thinking of planting and integrating woodland within their existing systems going forward, which will evolve over 10 to 20 years probably, rather than rushing to take a decision now. And so what would your recommendation be, Andrew, to somebody who's looking at farming just now and trying to make head of tail of which direction to go? What would you suggest he or she did at this moment?
It's a little bit of a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true, which is look at controlling the things which are within your control. You know, if we think maybe 18, 20 months ago, the prospect of Brexit and leaving the European Union was a potential significant threat to a lot of farmers, particularly the red meat sector. And then along comes COVID and completely changes the complexion of the market for, in particular, red meat. And despite a 60% reduction in exports to the EU in January, we've never seen lamb prices high because domestic consumption had gone up so much. Now, we couldn't have predicted some of those external factors, and even less had any influence on them. But what farmers can do is look towards increasing their own resilience, because there will always be some element of volatility, whether it's weather or market or political influence that is going to be out with their control. But the more that we can work to improve the resilience of our businesses, of our soils, the more that the farming industry can grow. And the last point I would say is probably on collaboration. I think we're going to see more and more collaboration, both informal and formal, going forward. And I think that can only be a good thing.
That has to be the right thing. And Hugo, you'll have seen, have you, changes in the leisure side with changes in farming, forestry? Where does leisure fit into this, and how's that operated, and how's that going to operate in the future?
Well, I think, as you say, off the back of COVID, staycation opportunities have, jumped out and been seized upon, and a lot of new opportunities have arisen, and it's been very exciting for the rural area. People stuck in cities wanting to get out, and Scotland has a huge amount to offer. I think what is exciting about it as well is that this trend hasn't just arisen as a result of COVID. Since 2019 was the record year for Scotland in terms of tourism activity, and so we've seen continuous growth before COVID even happen. But I think the key for rural business owners is to understand their market, understand their relative skills and resources that they have as a business, and then apply them appropriately. And one needs to understand one's local market, as COVID has highlighted, as well as the national and international, because you can't always rely on visitors being able to visit.
And are those visitors, when they're coming, to take something as simple as housing lets, holiday lets, are the demand, is a demand for getting energy in a sort of a renewable fashion, or are clients still going ahead with gas and oil?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's both opportunity and compliance as two different aspects. The opportunities in renewable energy still exist, but they tend to be pretty large scale because of the reduction in subsidy support. But the more sort of compliance driven aspects in respect of, have we got energy efficient buildings, that is coming down the track very quickly, and therefore, people need to understand the energy efficiency of their houses, their farm buildings, and so on. Because as part of this whole conversation that you started was about net zero, how are we as individual businesses going to achieve net zero? Well, one has to start by understanding one's own position and property.
Absolutely. We'll come on to carbon in a second, but we might just touch on, if we could, please, what does the market think of all this, and what are buyers paying, and what are they asking for?
The market at the moment is very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen such a sort of polar market going on. If you look at the stats for farms being offered to the market on the open market, we're in another period of little activity. So we're following a trend of less and less acres coming onto the market every year. Last year, obviously with COVID, accentuated things, and we're at an all-time low. So far this year, I think there's a small increase in supply, but if you compare it to 2018, I think it's half the acreage that was offered for sale, and a third of the year before. So much reduced, which would suggest not much going on. But actually, what we're seeing is a lot of private deals going on. And for us, between January and end of May, we transacted on 10 farms over 6,000 acres, which normally would not be happening. So there's a
prices similar to last year?
Stronger, I would say. Perhaps the quality of the units that we've been involved with, but there's an absolute appetite for those that I think are committed to staying in farming. When the right opportunity appears, there is an appetite, and we've seen some prices that have even surprised the agents being paid. So if I said that I thought at the top end prices might have gone on by 10-15%, I don't think I'd be far off the mark.
Quite amazing. And that lack of supply perhaps reflects the fact that we've got less direction in Scotland in which direction we're going after 2024, whereas England, land supply is up 50% this year, and they've got a framework. They've still got some answers to get, but they've now got a framework to work with it.
Yeah.
Let's just jump on to carbon. And Andrew, we've seen what people are doing with woodland, young woodlands under 20 years for carbon capture. We've seen demand for peatland for carbon. What looking forward, what's going to happen to soil carbon?
I think that's a longer term picture, and there are a lot of conflicting views on whether it is something that will ever become a tradable asset in the same way that carbon credits are currently for forestry in particular, and peatland restoration. The principle, I think, is sound, though, in that there are a lot of soils, particularly the more arable soils, that have opportunity for significant carbon sequestration by increasing the level of soil organic matter. But I think for most on the ground farmers, where there is not a direct commercial opportunity, there is still opportunity to improve resilience of the business by looking at building soil carbon, reducing the amount of water and soil runoff, increasing soil resilience to extreme weather events, reducing disturbance in soils will increase the resilience of the business, whether there's an opportunity to sell a carbon credit or not. And we're seeing more and more farmers engaging in that process, even ones who were absolutely dead set against it little more than 18 months ago.
What does the panel think about, there's a huge market opening up now for carbon credits for offsetting elsewhere. But I mean, should farmers and landowners be looking at selling carbon credits, or should they be holding them to try and have a net balance in their own businesses? Hugo, what do you think?
I think so. First off, is understanding what asset you hold, and so probably some baseline surveys, etc., to understand that. It's not for me to necessarily guess where the price could be in the future, but the sentiments that one seems to hear is that there is potential for price rising in carbon, but like any sort of investment, and I'm not an investment advisor necessarily, but you know, a bit of hedging one's bets, and perhaps you know, if there's a necessity to create some cash just now, then it's not a wrong decision to make.
That's one view. Why don't we ask Evelyn, if you come across a farm or estate where they have sold the carbon credits off, is that estate now worth less or the same as before they've been sold away?
Well, it's a third party potential infringement on your ownership, which some people might not like. I think what I am very conscious of is landowners, farmers selling their carbon credits, really understanding what does that mean. You are obliged to deliver those carbon credits year after year after year, and you know, the what if, for example, your trees don't grow satisfactorily, etc. You've still got to deliver those credits, and you may have to then go and buy them from somewhere else to supplement your contract. So I think for me, there's an awful lot of just making sure you understand the full picture before following the headlines, I suspect. But yeah, no, I think most landowners that still want to control or be able to manage everything together. And if there are different third parties or commitments in there, that it has to be taken into consideration.
Surely, Andrew, just before we leave this one, surely farmers should be looking at getting to net zero in their own business with their own carbon credits before they look at selling things off for a profit.
Yeah, it's a good point, Charlie, and a very good point made by Ev, relating back to your previous question in terms of soil carbon, is truly understanding what would be being expected if a large corporate is looking to offset their own carbon emissions. They're also going to be looking for accountability and audit trail, and being able to demonstrate what is being provided over what in some cases can be a very long period of time, up to 99 years. So I think for most, even before the point of looking at net zero within their own business, is understanding where they currently stand, so that we're seeing more businesses looking at things like natural capital accounting and auditing, and carbon accounting and auditing, to understand where they currently are. And that's probably where the majority of businesses are, is looking to establish a baseline to understand where they are.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair point. And let's leave carbon now. And just before we round up, Hugo, I've always been told the average age of farm, all my career, the average age of farmers has been 60 or 65, and it still seems to be 60 or 65. So what should the generations be looking at in terms of succession and taxation that may be around the corner? We keep being told it's coming in, but hasn't yet come.
Well, I think there is a constant fear of change of taxation, because in many ways farming is very well protected within a tax system at the moment. And so with, dare I say it, COVID and other aspects, there is a risk that there could be a call for greater taxation on rural businesses. So like any succession plan in any business, starting early and having the honest conversations with family or members or business partners is crucially important. So engage early, understand again your assets and where you want to get to, and if the next generation does want to take on farming, and in certain cases they don't.
So that's very, very helpful, very true. Just take your time and let things evolve. So coming to the end of this, I think that's been very helpful, very speedy roundup. Thank you very much. But before we leave you, I'm going to stick you on the hook and ask for one thing that your clients should be thinking of to be looking out for in the next 3 or 4 years as things evolve, to help guide them. And we'll start with the boss. So Hugo, what do you think?
Well, I might continue that last theme, which was taxation, because there are unintended tax consequences in a lot of what is going on. The environmental value, be it in natural capital or in carbon and other things, hasn't really been dealt with in farming, in the context of farming and agriculture. Agricultural value is defined, but it's not defined so far as carbon and other aspects come in. So there could be big tax changes to come.
Okay, so what's that tax? That's from you. And Andrew, going forward, what's the one thing farmers should be looking at as they make up their mind where they're going in the next 5 to 10 years?
For me, I think it would be summed up by saying, think outside the boundary of the farm. I think there is significant opportunity beyond the farm gate with collaboration, joint ventures, contract farming, to build that resilience point that we talked about previously. And the more that we can broaden our horizons and think beyond the farm gate, the more likely that is to happen.
Very fair point. And finally, Evelyn,
well, I think I'll probably steal a bit of both of those because they're both relevant. One, taxation. I think that influences a lot of people's decision making in the land side. And yeah, thinking outside the box. What's going to influence people is the outside world. It's going to be about climate change and that journey to net zero and what is expected of people. So being alert and constantly reviewing where you're at and where you're going.
Which is a very, very good point. Actually, my final point on that would be that actually farming is a remarkably resilient industry and has been for hundreds of years, and I'm sure will continue to be so. If you have the appetite to be nimble and take on these changes, then I think the future is very bright. If you keep looking back to where you've come from and what you've had in the past, I think that is definitely going to change. And have you got the stomach for what's going to happen the next 2 to 5 years would be my question. But thank you very much for your time. And in Savills, we've a large rural business which covers many different disciplines that we haven't also covered here today. So out there, if you'd like to know more, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find our contact numbers, and anyone up there would be delighted to speak to you and try and help you. Thank you for listening to us. We hope we'll see you in person at the Highland Show next year at our tent round the ring. But until then, thank you very much.